introduce Miss Jackie to you, and then I am going to turn the floor over to this amazing woman. So Jackie Young Metcalf is the resounding voice of Texans who are negatively affected by toxins in their environment. With her environmental geology degree and a hand and passion for public health, Young discovered that what no doctor could, a hidden menace that threatened the lives within the home and those of San Jacinto residents, toxic chemicals and heavy metals seeping into the water supply. Today, as the Executive Director of Texas Health and Environment Alliance, she is in the front lines protecting public health by collaborating with government agencies, businesses, and community members to hold environmental polluters accountable. Y'all, this woman is a total rock star. I was introduced to her thanks to our January speaker, Miss Sahar Paz. I've loved to getting to know her, and you guys are going to love her too. So please help me air clap welcome Miss Jackie Young Metcalf. Miss Jackie, you got the floor, pretty lady.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And hello, Inspired Leaders. It's an honor to be with y'all today, and I appreciate all of you tuning in to hear about my story and my experiences. When we are fighting an invisible threat like COVID, it is extremely challenging to be inspired. And this is something that is not uncommon for us at Texas Health and Environment Alliance. Guiding communities, including business owners who are dealing with illnesses in the mass, is something that we're accustomed to. Before we get started, I want to give all of you some takeaways that you can keep in mind as I share my story and the journey that ultimately fueled my professional calling. So first, learn. Times like these, we're doing things that might be out of our comfort zone. We're all joining this meeting in a way that is not the traditional way that the group would be convening, but it's something that we're doing to continue opportunities, even if something might take us out of our comfort zone. Second takeaway is take the wheel. When you keep doing what you're doing the same way, it can get extremely comfortable. Or we can take the wheel and create what's needed. That's what I did in creating Thea. I founded Thea out of absolute necessity. Believe that you're in the line of work that you're in for your purpose and for a greater reason. The world today has shifted, but what you know of yourself and your capabilities is absolutely still the same. The next takeaway is going to be show up. Showing up is something that has been critical to our success in my career over the last 5 years running Texas Health and Environment Alliance. And last, know your rights. Knowledge is absolutely power. Okay, so now I want to get into a bit of my journey, and I'm going to take us back to 2010. In 2010, I was 24 years old, and I was an undergraduate student. As a 24-year-old and an undergrad, I was absolutely one of the oldest students in my program, but that really didn't bother me. I noticed it was a thing, but the hardest part was the health struggles that I was enduring. In May of 2010, I had my first seizure. It absolutely came out of nowhere. I'd been struggling with my health for many years prior to that, but nothing to that degree. So what was challenging was I'd found my passion. I loved what I was studying. I was actually a communications major prior to switching to environmental geology. I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I was 18 to my early 20s. I floundered quite a bit. And then I took a random semester in college and really realized my love for science. And so that led to me changing my major to environmental geology. But I was then experiencing major health problems. Doctors were unable to identify exactly what these problems were. And it felt at many times like a very hopeless journey. So going through this, even though my health seemed to be failing me, and it was everything within me just to continue my education, I felt hopeless at times. I felt, that wasn't necessarily fair what I was going through, but I always stayed mentally strong. And I always felt like whatever this was that was going on in my life was happening for a reason. And because of that, I knew that I had to continue my education. And my mother has been influential in my life more so than probably anybody else. And she kept pushing me to continue my education, to continue volunteering in my activism. And I wasn't going to give up learning, and she definitely wasn't going to let me give up learning. Now, something as, a mid-20 something year old in college, the most humbling experience was I had lost use of both of my hands. By 2011, I was about 50 pounds lighter than I am today, which is just crazy. I was losing my hair, lost use of both my hands. And so not giving up on my education while my health was failing me meant my mom was everything to me. By that time, I'd had to move back home because of my health failing. And literally, my mom would have to drive me to campus. She would have to walk me to class because I couldn't open a door for myself. She'd have to carry my textbooks and get me situated in class, opening my books and getting everything ready for my fellow classmates who would take notes for me. And so not only was I older than everybody, my mom's walking me into class. So it was truly a humbling experience, but we definitely knew that we were not going to give up on my education because we believed it was truly taking us somewhere. Now that summer, I was having about 7 seizures on average a week. And doctors could not figure out what was going on. Over that year, I had gone through extensive medical testing for doctors to try to figure out, what was causing my seizures, where they were coming from, and they simply couldn't figure it out. And many times they would actually tell me that if what I explained to them actually happened, that I would have brain damage. So I had to actually start keeping a log of my seizures, of who witnessed them, just so that I could take that to the doctors so that I would have witnesses of the experiences I was telling them. So that reminds me of, what so many people in our world are going through right now. And that experience taught me you have to be your own advocate. No matter what, you have to stand firm and be your own advocate. So that summer, I was in a hydrology course, and we had to do a semester-long case study. And KHOU, a local Houston news station, had reported that Houston's tap water is radioactive. And I thought, we have this pristine groundwater well, and I am going to compare our private groundwater well to the city's water source, and that will be my case study for this course. And I was blown away at what I found. I thought here I was going to kind of toot our own horn at our pristine water source and, find additional problems potentially with the city source. And it was absolutely opposite of that. The city source actually checked out fairly normal. It is true. Many parts of Houston do have radioactive particles in their water. However, what we found in our water pivoted this entire journey for me. I found flakes of heavy metals in our water. The flakes were so large, you actually didn't need to put them into a piece of sampling or analysis equipment. You could actually see the flakes of metal with the human eye. So my professors, who were very aware of my illnesses, suggested that I get tested for heavy metals. So I did. I had 19 out of the 21 heavy metals in my body that I was tested for. Things that, as a science undergraduate, things I didn't even remember learning in the basics of chemistry, things like thorium, things that are, not something common like lead or mercury or arsenic that we hear about. Now, I had all of those also, but I had things, like I said, I'd never heard of. And I thought, how on earth did I get these elements in my body? That's when it was time for me to take the wheel. Year after year, we would attend EPA meetings, and they would give the same presentation. Nothing was changing. Nothing was being done about cleaning up a toxic waste site in our community. I began researching like crazy and trying to figure out what possibly could be in the environment making me and our animals sick. At that time, we didn't realize that my dad was struggling with a form of bone marrow and blood cancer called multiple myeloma. So I found out that my family unknowingly lived in between 5 toxic waste sites, one of which, the San Jacinto River waste pits, had not been cleaned up at all and was sitting openly exposed in the San Jacinto River near our home. Oops, sorry there. Like all of us, working with this technical world. Okay, so I knew something had to be done. And like many of us, looking at the industry that we're looking at getting into or that we're considering starting a business in, you often look at who is doing what in that industry. And so looking around at the EPA meetings and at the other environmental organizations in the Houston area, there wasn't anyone working on cleaning up these toxic culprits or Superfund sites. A Superfund site is an abandoned toxic waste site that sits uncontrolled and often languishes for decades before something is potentially done about cleaning that site up. We have fabulous environmental organizations around Houston that work on air quality, surface water quality, but there really wasn't anybody that I could turn to help us with cleaning up the Superfund site, which is part of a federal program. So I knew that I had to take the wheel, that I had to do something about this, because going to meeting after meeting and not seeing any change and not seeing anything done and seeing officials talk right over the heads of our community members didn't sit well with me. All of the sick children I'd met, all of the sick people I'd met is not something that I knew could go on. So this is why I say I started Thea out of necessity. Someone had to do it. I'm fortunate that some of the foundations in the Houston and Austin region from the very early years believed that I was the woman for the job. Okay, now leading into the next part. Taking the wheel and actually knowing how to drive are two different things. For me, my background is technical. I majored in environmental science, specialized in environmental geology. So learning how to build and drive a nonprofit organization are very far out of my wheelhouse and very different. The hardest part for me in starting the organization was all of the IRS paperwork that it took to get our 501c3 status. It honestly took me about a year. Let's see, yesterday was our 5-year anniversary. So I'm so honored and thrilled that we are not only surviving, but we are thriving as an entity. And my mother pushed me, as I mentioned already, she pushed me because I would say, how are we going to have funding? Where are we going to find money? How am I going to pay myself? Because I knew that in order to do this important work, it was going to have to be a full-time career. And so she really helped me stick to it and believe, what others were telling me, and that I truly was the woman for the job. So over that year where I worked through all of the paperwork and all of the things that were so foreign to me, but absolutely essential to establishing a business and a brand, I certainly struggled, but after that year, we received our 501c3 status from the IRS, and we have been moving ever since. So during that year and over time, fighting some of the biggest companies in the world, it would be easy to give up. It would be easy to let go of the wheel. Absolutely, it would be the easier thing to do. But you can't just turn your back and stop believing. It's not who I am. I knew we had to keep pushing forward. I want to be sure I convey the message. As I say, we fight some of the largest companies in the world. We as an organization and me as a person are absolutely not anti-business, but I believe that we have to have a common ground. We have to act responsibly and reasonably for our current population and our populations of the future. It's absolutely essential. So I want to share with you guys a very low point in my career. Fighting large companies, you might imagine that a small nonprofit who, gosh, in our early years, we were working on less than $100,000 budget. So you might imagine that when we're opposing large companies, they can outfund us, outlawyer us, out-research us, all of these things. And so one of the things that I had no idea about was that I could actually get pulled into litigation without, one, being sued, and two, suing someone. I thought, maybe one day we might end up in litigation in a lawsuit, but I didn't know that I could be served subpoenas and get pulled into litigation that could cost us around $100,000 and years to fight. So several years ago, we went through that experience. We now have a litigation budget. Huge lesson learned. I think that's something we can all relate to as we, wade through uncharted territories, learning things and then improving our practices in the future because of what we've learned. So it was about 9 o'clock at night, and I had, my dog was a puppy at that time, and we only ever really used the back door because that's, what went to the carport, and we really didn't use the front door. So my puppy didn't know I even had a front door. And so around 9 o'clock at night, my dog and I, were in the house, and there was a knock at the front door. And we looked at each other like, did you hear that? And so I went and I looked through the blinds, and it was a really, really tall, big guy, and he had some paperwork in his hands. And I said, can I help you? And he said, I'm here to serve you. So I thought, oh, great. So I talked to the man, and he served me with third-party subpoenas. So that was when I first found out that we were getting pulled into a court case by these companies that we were fighting merely to get them to clean up their mess. So at that point, I started scrambling. What do we do? How do we respond? And very quickly, obviously, had to hire an attorney. And that ended up costing us so much money that we were not prepared for. So not only was I uneasy because I thought, okay, now these guys know where I live. At that time, I was not married, and it was scary as a single woman to know that these companies, who can, some of them known to be dirty players, know where I lay my head at night. But what really hit me was when we ran out of money. I didn't know, like I said, that was a thing, that could happen. And so that fall, we actually had spent every single penny we had on fighting these companies in court, and we ran out of money. And my team and I worked for a couple of months without any pay. But we believed, and we held strong to our belief and our mission that what we were doing was essential, and that we had to keep pushing forward for this important work. Now, I know during these times, a lot of us have really uncertain financial futures. There's the relief program, and a lot of us are not only working from home, but our businesses have been impacted in so many ways. And if I could just encourage you to just hold tight to what you believe your mission is here on this planet, and keep pushing forward, and that we are all going to make it through these times. We did, as an organization, yes, we worked for a couple of months without pay, and we were very fortunate that we were in the positions to be able to do that. But it wasn't easy, but we continued to push forward. Okay, so the next takeaway is showing up. This has been a monumental component of our work. So, what's a daily or what's an average week like, or what's a day like for me? They're never the same. For one, running a business, two, working with the public and our government officials and our politicians. It's always changing every day, and that's something I really love about what I do. But showing up is something that is not that hard. I have, however, had moments where I showed up, and maybe I was having some anxiety, right? So I recall a very specific fundraising event I went to. I was in a suit, a skirt suit. I felt all confident in my business suit, and I go marching into this event, and the entire room was older white men. There were maybe less than 10 women in that room, all much older than I was at that time. I walked in that room and I pivoted, and I turned right back and walked out. It was incredibly intimidating, but I went out in the hall and, said, okay, you're here for a reason. You were invited here. You're supposed to be here. Get back in there. And I did. And so even when it wasn't easy to show up, even when it's not easy to show up, you still have to keep pushing forward. And in times like we are in right now, it is so different than it was. But I encourage you, like we're all here today, we all showed up for this today. Be in touch with your loved ones, keep in touch with your staff, and continue to show up in these unconventional ways that we're maybe not used to. Now, I want to tell you a story that was one of the higher points of my career, and it all started with showing up. So one night I received a tip from a reporter, and this tip came after midnight, and it said, Administrator Pruitt is going to be at the waste pits tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So immediately when I got the tip, I started drafting a letter to Administrator Pruitt. I started putting together a folder of facts, fishing advisories, information that I felt it was important to get into his hands, and cleared my calendar so I could show up. And so I did. Administrator Pruitt, for those of you who are not familiar with him, he was the first appointed administrator of the EPA under the Trump administration. So he was visiting the waste pits after Hurricane Harvey because they experienced severe damage in the hurricane. So I showed up to the gate of the waste pits, and the security would not let me through. So I said, okay, I'll wait here. I'll simply wait here. And so I did. I waited in my car, and I saw this caravan of black vehicles come by me, and then they stopped. Out hopped a young lady, and so I approached her, and she said, we heard that you're here to see Administrator Pruitt and that you're a local community leader. And I said, yes, that's true. And she said, he'd like to speak with you. So I stood there waiting, and then next thing you know, Administrator Pruitt approached me and shook my hand and talked to me like a real person. This was the first time anyone of his level, literally the head of the Environmental Protection Agency appointed by the president, first time anyone of his level had put their boots on that site. And so for me, that was a really big deal. And actually being able to meet him, get a packet of information in his hands, and have a conversation with him was everything. Administrator Pruitt has received so much negative press, which ultimately led to his resignation from the agency. But I was a fan of his. I'll always be a fan of the work he did for the Superfund program and for the average American just like myself. In that conversation, Administrator Pruitt said that he was not satisfied with the uncertainty of the site and with the vulnerability of the site being in the river in a flood-prone, tidally influenced waterway. So I relayed important local knowledge to him, and we had a wonderful conversation. And he told me, upon departing our conversation, he told me, you will have an answer. You will have a record of decision, which is the important legally binding component in the Superfund process. You will have a decision by the Red River rivalry. Now, Administrator Pruitt was from Oklahoma. Here, I'm a Texan. And so we had a chuckle, but I thought, okay, this guy, he's talking about a college football game to me. So, that really stuck out to me. And the next day, the local newspaper quoted me saying, Administrator Pruitt has until the Red River rivalry to show me if he is a man of his word or if he's wasting my time. I didn't know they were going to quote me on that. But they did. And so that got back to Washington, D.C. And he told me that everyone in D.C. was saying, what is this Red River rivalry that you promised Jackie? And so he had to explain to them that it's a Texas OU football game. And so anyways, Administrator Pruitt and I ended up meeting numerous times before that football game. And a few days before that game, he signed into the record of decision exactly what we were advocating for. He went against the big corporations, against what everyone thought he was going to do, and he sided with the people. He sided with what was best, what the community needed, and what the environment needed. And that was huge. And that all began from showing up, from saying, I deserve to be here. I deserve to be a part of this process, and I'm going to use my voice to let you know what we all so desperately need. Now that takes me to my last takeaway, knowing your rights. For me, this is essential. I was that 20-something-year-old who believed her environment was harming her health and the health of her family, but didn't know where to turn, didn't know who could help, and thought, if something were wrong with my environment, TCEQ or the EPA or our county government, somebody would send us a letter. Somebody would inform us that there were contaminants in our water that we were pulling into our home, bathing in, and consuming. And I learned the hard way that that's not necessarily the case. So knowing your rights is essential. Right now, we're all dealing with COVID, an invisible killer, and we're fortunate enough to have shelter-in-place solutions. But when it comes to the invisible killer that can enter the homes of so many Americans, something that lives in our environment, potentially lives in our water, it's important for you all to know your rights. We are at FIA producing a water bill of rights, and I would love to share it with you all in the next month. So please stop by our website, www.txhea.org, or follow us on our social media to stay up to date with the release of Knowing Your Rights. I really look forward to everyone being able to have this educational and informational document so that you too can learn to better be your own advocate. However, right now, I want to go ahead and open up the floor to any questions about your water, your environment, your health, or about FIA.
Thank you so much, Jackie. You're so awesome. I have opened the chat so that everybody can message. So why don't you send your messages through the chat, and then Jackie can answer them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Tracy, your message went to me privately. I'm not sure. Make sure that you send the chat to everybody. I don't know what's going on. All these messages are coming to me privately, even though I opened it up. So I will read them, or some of them. So Tracy says, very informational. Thank you for sharing your story. Bob wants to know, where did you go for your initial funding to begin your project?
All right, so when I graduated college in 2013, I didn't look for a job like most college seniors. In my senior year, I knew that I had the early stages of cervical cancer. And so I was taking some time off after I graduated. And it was during that time that a local nonprofit actually convinced me to work for them. I said, no way, my dad has cancer. I'm the only one working. Like, I have got to, make more money than that. And they had funding at that time from Houston Endowment and the Mitchell Family Foundation. And so those two funders actually came to me within the first 6 months of me working for that nonprofit and said, you really should go out on your own. Houston has over 20 Superfund sites that need to be cleaned up. And so those are the two entities that provided me with seed funding. And I'm so blessed that they have continued to be solid funders of ours ever since.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. I've got a question from Kimberly Devine. She says, locally, what are some of the highest concerns that may affect us in the Spring Woodlands area?
So one resource that I absolutely love is the Environmental Working Group's tap water database. So if your water is provided to you from a public supplier, you can go onto EWG's tap water database online, and you can put in your zip code and then find your water district, find where you pay your water bill, and see what's in your water. Please feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to walk you through this or explain what this means for you. But what I will say across the board is that our water laws are not in place to protect our health. Our water laws have been set on what is feasible to filter out on a mass scale. So in the Houston region, in our petrochemical complex, we manufacture over 80,000 different chemical compounds, some of which are illegal in our own country, but we manufacture them and export them. And our water laws only test for just over 200 contaminants, on some of them on sporadic basis. So in our country, we do a superb job at getting waterborne illnesses out of our water. But what we truly need to improve on, not only for, the northeast part of Houston or Harris County, but for the whole country, is setting laws that are more up to speed with where we are today. Because when you're in a region where you manufacture over 80,000 different compounds, we have explosions, we have spills, we have accidents. What can go under the radar, undetected, and flow into our homes with no taste, no smell, and no color is very scary reality. I am a huge advocate on filtration. I am a huge advocate on whether your water is from a private source or a public source. You have to filter what comes into your home.
Thank you, Jackie. That actually brings me to my next question. Katie wants to know, do you think water filtration systems are strong enough to help, or is there something that more people should do?
Sure. So, there's a couple different components here. What can we do on a local level? What can we do as individuals? And then what we can do on a federal level with these regulations and standards. So on a federal level, we do need improvements with our regulations and our standards. But what every individual can do is you can put a filtration system at the port of entry on your home. Now be careful. Oftentimes, whenever we help communities with water contamination issues and we have news stories, water companies will just infiltrate in. And oftentimes we find that they're selling people stuff that's not best for that home. For example, if you have galvanized pipes, you should not have a water softener in your home. We worked with the communities in Southwest Houston, Missouri City, and A-Leaf. A-Leaf has the third highest rates of chromium-6 or hexavalent chromium in their tap water that they pay the city of Houston for. Third highest rates out of the whole nation. Now that's the famous Aaron Brockovich contaminant. Water companies flooded those neighborhoods with door-to-door salespeople, and they were selling them water softeners. I'm like, what? So a water softener is applicable if it has an ion rod in it for that contaminant. But what I recommend for every American is called a cat hack. And it looks like a huge helium tank. And you put it at the port of entry. And so everything that flows into your home is going through that. And it's high activated carbon from coconut husk. And there are thousands of contaminants that absorb and adsorb to that coconut husk or to that carbon, and then remain in that tank. So the water that you make your coffee with, that you cook with, you brush your teeth, you bathe, you drink, all comes into your home that much more protected.
Awesome. Thank you. You're getting some sweet comments, so make sure that you are reading those. But Patricia O'Brien says, you are an inspiration. How are you doing health-wise?
Thank you. Thank you. My dad and I are both really good at putting our best foot forward, going out, whether it's hosting a community meeting or going to a family gathering and putting our best foot forward and just really leaving it all out there. After this, I'm going to be pretty exhausted. I've been a little under the weather recently, not sure what's going on, but overall, as soon as we left where we lived, which was Highlands, as soon as we left Highlands, our daily health improved. Now, unfortunately, we do have long-term health consequences that we are suffering because, of what we were exposed to and the damage that was done. My greatest struggle is with my endometriosis. I have stage 4 endometriosis. So really end of the line there. I'm on about every 2-year surgery regimen, unfortunately. But that truly impacts my everyday life. And, if you're wondering really how I got to, getting my hair back, getting meat back on my bones, use of my hands is I went through extensive chelation treatment intravenously for about 6 weeks. And so that is truly what got me on the path that I'm on today, to where I saw major improvements in my day in and day out life.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Yeah, we had another question about, did your health change after you stopped drinking that water? And it sounds like it definitely did.
Absolutely.
And then Kristen asked about how we advocate for our water systems to be clean, and Sahar had mentioned to her that she could reach out to you, but is there anything specific that you guys recommend that people can do, or just reach out to Thea and you guys can help, or what would you suggest?
Sure. So one thing, that I have a huge problem with is the way our state notifies us when our public suppliers have been in violation. It's always after the fact. So it's after the fact that a harmful contaminant has come through your water line and into your home, and you've already been exposed. So it's like, oh, thanks for letting us know that 4 months ago, this bacteria or this contaminant came into our home. So something that I would say just across the board for everyone is look into your water district. It's your right to look at their records, look at what they're reporting to the federal government and to the state. Like I said, the EWG tap water database is the most superb, free online resource for everyone to go to. And it really has just about every public water supplier in the nation in that database. And again, feel free to reach out to us. I'm very happy to help you understand what you find in there from your water district. And then keep in mind when you're doing that, what's legal is not what is safe. So they will show you in that database what the health guideline is. So the health guidelines are not enforceable by law. The health guidelines are set based on what we know to cause adverse effects from exposure above those levels. And then you have what's legally enforceable, which is often many times higher than that health guideline. So it does a really great job of breaking that information down for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There was a couple of people wanting to clarify the name of the filtration system that you mentioned, and then what was the cap that you were talking about? So specifics about the filtration system and then the cap you were talking about.
Okay, so the filtration system, the system I have on my home that I will always have on my home, all of my family has it, is a CAT hack, CAT-HAC. That's the acronym, CAT hack. And the one that I have is made by Pentair. I truly, really believe in those products.
How do you spell that?
Pentair?
Yes.
That's a good question. I'm a horrible speller. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Pentair. They have helium tanks all over.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's what I would guess.